many hours over the years in lightning delays. I think the one that had the most lightning delays was actually the Chance Gilbert episode in 307, where you'll remember Vic gets beat with a baseball bat with a helmet. We lost virtually an entire day, added up over several days in lightning delays. But when they were doing that Vision Quest ceremony, it took us 3 different attempts, actually, of going to that location, shooting, getting shut down by lightning, sun going down, having to go back again, try it again. Meanwhile, the main company was shut down by lightning back in Santa Fe, where we're doing a scene on a football field, and they're waiting for Rob at the other location to pick up the shots they missed. And then, of course, we go back in the following episode where we see the results of it, and for Walt, it was successful in that he was praying to putting his goodwill out there because Katie Longmire had been hit by a car and was in the hospital. And it's just as the skid rips through and he goes to the ground, Katie wakes up. So it was emotional in the cutting together the different sequences that we did. But no, Rob is a tough guy, but we didn't really pierce him.
That actually was also my most terrifying moment in effects for 6 years, because we had a pole on the mesa. On the pole we had aircraft cable inside the leather lattice that ran to him, and then we had a rig when you didn't see it that was around him, that aircraft cable went to both nipples. The problem was when you saw...
Randy sometimes uses the same outfit on weekends, when
I do actually. I look great in it.
Explains the pink hat.
You can go a long way with
I'm
this.
very secure with my pink hat and my explosive nipples. So we have Robert Taylor attached to the highest point of a mesa with stainless steel aircraft cable to his nipples. And the producer says, all the crew needs to get to the vans because there's lightning. And I said, Pat, Robert is hooked to the highest point on the mesa with aircraft cable. And he goes, just get to the van. And I walked up to Robert and I said, I need to cut you loose. He goes, I'm not scared. And I said, you need to be. So then later on, those aircraft cable go to another rig, and we use what are called explosive cable cutters. And we literally, when Robert falls back, we explosively severed the cables on both sides. So within hours of having him in a very active lightning storm hooked to his nipples with stainless steel cable, I'm walking up, Maggie and I are walking up telling him, okay, so now we're putting these explosive cable cutters on your nipples and they'll cut the cable, and you've seen the video where we demoed it and everything, so you'll be fine. And he's like, no, that's fine, that's okay. And any other actor would have said, no, you are not putting explosive cable cutters on my nipples. Just the sound of that makes it not going to happen. But Rob's like, yeah, okay, go ahead. And there was still lightning, and if the thing about explosives is you don't like static electricity, you don't like lightning. And I'm thinking, so now I've got explosive cable cutters on his nipples. He's still hooked to the pole with stainless steel. This is just not a good thing. But it went fine. It looked great.
And everybody around is using walkie-talkies that generate static discharge right around him. Yeah, the details. It looks so easy when you see it on the air, but you start hearing some of these details and you realize what we go through. I know many of you have actually had the experience of being on a set or being on our set at times. Just show me by a sign of hands if you've ever been on a movie set. To me, the most astonishing thing is that we can avoid our own equipment, that there's so much of, and so many people just off screen that in these very intimate moments, there's 80 people standing around watching them that you don't see on camera, hopefully, if we do our job right.
Then put livestock.
And then put the livestock in there. And one of the joys that I had working on the show was getting to work with some of the interesting animals, whether it was the owl, that almost looks robotic as it turns around, but no, it was very real. The Bison Attack, if you remember that, we had a wolf that was half dog, but it was a wolf. Yeah.
I did make a bison. They another thing, they go, hey, for tomorrow's shot, is there any way you can do a bison that hits the front of the Bronco just in case the real one doesn't do it? And so, props, I go to Dave Bowman, I go, so who has a bison head around town? And he goes, well, how big? I go, however big the bison is that we have for tomorrow. I haven't seen him. So over to the shop comes a bison head, and then we made a little thing that we could raise it up and down, and it could do its snorting and moving and everything. And then for several of the close-up shots, I was the bison. I pushed the bison. they give me a running start, and Fat Boy would push the bison into the front of the Bronco, and they go, oh, that's great. Okay, so now hit the headlight harder. It's like, okay. And then we had to give this bison head back to the poor guy after it slammed into a Bronco half dozen times.
The actual contact shot was the false bison head that Randy was wearing. Well, almost. At the last second on set, because the bison had been trained for a week by the animal trainers who would put a bucket of feed on the front bumper of the car. So every time it saw the car, it's like, oh, food, hey, running up to the car. But the contact moment was done with the fake bison head. But at the very last second, we discovered the horns were a different color. They were white. And the horns on the bison, the live one we were using, were kind of blackish. Yeah, so here we are with a magic marker or whatever tape, covering the bison horns to make it look a match. And the other thing was, of course, in that scene, an important element was the white bison calf, which was symbolic. And the big bison wasn't going to necessarily like that little bison and probably would have killed it had it actually made eye contact together. So if you look very carefully, you'll see how the little young bison runs behind the car and in a different direction. We had them connected in a few shots, but generally we had to work them separately because unlike actors, not all animals like each other.
Not all actors like each other.
What?
The other thing that was funny is as we're slamming the fake bison head into the car, the Wrangler comes over to him and he goes, don't let the real bison see you. If he sees you, just abandon the head and run.
Most animals are trainable. Big bears, big mountain lions, cats, they're trainable. There's a couple animals that I've learned that you're never supposed to work with on film because they're aggressive and untrainable. One is a bison. Another one, which I had experience working on a show called Northern Exposure, is a moose. They're very aggressive, not really trainable. And then, of course, most reptiles and snakes. We did have, in this season, we had one scene early in the season that involved a live rattlesnake. And obviously, safety on the set is a big part of my job. And we had some dead rattlesnakes that we would use that were frozen but real. We had a rubber one. And I had to encourage the crew not to play with the rubber one or the dead ones because they're just as deadly dead as they are alive. And of course, the living one for the real shot of, seeing it move around and rattle its tail, we try to limit the crew. Fortunately, nobody got killed this year, so we did great. Yeah.
There's a guy in Santa Fe named Dusty Webb who's a rattlesnake wrangler for films, and that's what he does, is he handles snakes. And on a lot of the sets in New Mexico, and I don't know whether you ran into it, there are live, not trainable, wild rattlesnakes who have a tendency to get in the way.
Yeah.
And they have people like Dusty who goes around and captures them.
For most of our locations, we actually have a snake wrangler working on the crew who's wandering around the entire time looking for snakes, fortunately not finding them often. But it's a real danger in a lot of places that we shoot because we get 80 people who don't know better tripping over bushes and, not paying much attention because they're carrying heavy equipment.
The other thing you have to, if you're on Facebook and you follow Robert, you have to realize Brian said, we told the crew don't touch the frozen snakes. We told the crew don't touch the rubber snakes. Stay away from the real snakes. And on Facebook, you'll see one man swinging snakes around in the air as he's skipping across the set. He's dressed as Walt Longmire.
We have another quick announcement here that needs to be
Yep.
made.
I have a black Chevrolet SUV out here, County 5, 14727. Got to get it moved. 14727.
Thanks, David.
Leaving a rattlesnake in the seat,
Yeah,
just in
way
case.
in the back of the white shirt.
Not frozen. You have to speak very loudly. We can't hear you.
Okay, you're talking about in the books the character Dog. Am I correct?
And what was the question part? It was interesting like that because obviously there've been conversations ever since the pilot episode with the producers about which characters they were thinking would be interesting to add into the television show like that, and they didn't want to introduce all of the characters from the get-go. They wanted to kind of advance characters as they went along like that. And some of the ones that we discussed were actually Dorothy from the Busy Bee Cafe was one. Santiago Cesar Batoria, the Basque deputy, was another one, and then Dog, which was kind of interesting too, like that, because I can tell you a little bit of the literary history about the dealings with Dog, like that. I mean, whenever you first start out in a business, there are always, and I'm sure it's maybe even worse in Hollywood, there are always a lot of people that want to give you advice about what you should do, and more importantly, what you shouldn't do. And there were a lot of people that when I started out said, well, don't give your protagonist a pet. Don't give them an animal, because then you got to take care of that animal, forever. And all I could think was, I got a whole ranch that I got to take care of. I don't see why Walt can't take care of one dog, right? And so my theory on this also is that basically I'm writing about an armed man who drives great distances all over Wyoming solving crimes. And I don't know about you, but armed people that talk to themselves kind of worry me. And so I thought maybe if you had the dog, maybe you would have it, kind of as a sounding board, to be able to go back and forth with. And so the dog actually became a really strong character, in the books, as I went along. But I got to tell you, when we were filming the pilot episode, it was the scene where they were going to Irene Bedard's house, and Chris Chulak was directing, and they had I guess it was a local dog wrangler who was responsible for making sure that the dogs did what they were supposed to do, when they were supposed to do it, and they were not cooperating at all. The dogs would bark at the camera people and run around, and all the equipment and all this stuff and do everything that they were not supposed to be doing. And I remember Chris Chulak looked over at us and said, "These dogs are eating into my drinking time." And I think it was that point that we met a certain amount of resistance to having a dog, actually in the show. It kind of backed it off a little bit, but who can say, in one of the future, incarnations of Walt Longmire, if Dog might appear, we never know.
All right, in the back is one of our crew members, David Bauman, who's our prop master. He can actually answer the gun question a little bit better.
He actually appears also as a character in Dry Bones, as a matter of fact.
Oh, yes.
He is one of the head paleontologists in Dry Bones, so he's actually a character in the books. So, and I didn't kill him or anything like that, which shows you how fond I am of him like that. So I'm going to abandon my chair and let him have mine. Here you go. Come on up, Dave.
Here, I'll tell you what. You sit down. I'll move.
No. You stay.
Good morning.
You're good.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm great.
So David, we had a question earlier about Walt's 3030 and some slight differences.
Thank you very much,
between
Craig.
two versions of it. Thank you, Craig.
Craig Johnson.
The amazing Craig Johnson.
And it's the gentleman here in the white hat. You'll have to tell me exactly what the difference was between the two guns that you were seeing.
In most scenes with local carriers of the Winchester,
Yes,
there's no hood on the rim sight.
yes.
Sometimes there is, and I was wondering if that was done by design.
What happened with that was when we did the first season and he was in the snow, he lost his rifle.
Pull the mic up closer to your
Oh,
face.
sorry,
so I can hear
sorry. He was chasing the guy, through the snow and everything, and he went through the river and everything, and he lost his rifle in that season. So then we brought another one into it.
Okay, so it was a story point that it was a change of
Yes,
weapon
there was-
after
and
episode
yes,
1
yes.
of season 2. Okay.
Absolutely, and if you look at that rifle in the first season, it was the stock was very, very, very blonde. And then the cool thing about it was written in that it was a 30-30, and it was my father-in-law's rifle that we used in that, because when he was a kid, he sanded off the stock, and it was really, really, really blonde. But anyway, so he lost it in that episode, and then so we brought the other one back, a new one, as far as what is. And that rifle is actually in Cody, Wyoming, at the Buffalo Bill Historical Center right now. It's on display there, So I mean, it's So there's the whole follow through as far as Walt's rifle and yeah. So he's had two in the series.
One of the more interesting things on the show is wandering through the storage for property, where you'll see a headless elk, you'll see a dead opossum, you'll see a lot of very unusual things that we've asked David to provide. Yes, question here.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's nothing that we intended. At the Barlow's house location, there was probably just a piece of burnt wood, in the active fireplace that was there, because within our scripts we never had a story point of having something there. And while we eventually learned, although I don't want this to be a spoiler for the people who haven't watched all the episodes, why we eventually learn what really happened to Branch, I don't think there was any intent there. And it may be, just like I said, a piece of burnt wood or shadows or ashes there that may have been misinterpreted. But there was no story point about him covering up evidence.
Questions? All right. Yes, sir.
Just a twofold question about casting. And this may be the wrong crowd for it, but I'm interested in how you cast some of the lead actors, given the differences between them physically and in the book.
I know the producers talked about the casting question, about how they found some of these people, and I could talk most specifically about Rob himself, and they searched for a long, long time. And the reason we ended up casting an Australian had to do with his work ethic. That as Chris Chulak, who directed the pilot, pointed out to our producers, to do a show of this size, and logistics that we're doing, which is mostly on location and very hard places to get to, we needed somebody who would work as hard as we found Robert Taylor work, and they had a very exhausting search. Chris had said to our producers, don't make the mistake of casting a name to help get the pilot sold. He says, you think about the long term of making the show, because you don't really make money on the show on a pilot. The studio deficit finances that, and the successful shows are what pay for the new pilots. So he said, think about the long term, and that was most specifically a long search for that became Rob Taylor. When he walked into the room, he held the room, and it's unfortunate that some of our American actors are a little bit more into the fame than they are the actual work to get there, and we found that some of the British and Australian actors have a different kind of work ethic about what they're doing, and Robert exemplifies it. He's one of the best number ones I've ever worked with. The lesser characters, I haven't heard those backstories, but I think that they were very successful in finding people that carried the weight of the character, even if they didn't physically match what was in the books. And that's why we've always called ourselves a parallel universe to the books.
Well, and Greer had said yesterday that, in fact, they passed by Robert Taylor on the first take. They decided he wasn't the right one. But they'd been looking at it on a 2-inch screen. And somebody said, yeah, but that voice. And so they went back and looked at it again and said, oh yeah, he's the one.
Do you cast some of the smaller parts locally in New Mexico?
We try to cast some of the smaller parts, the day player parts in New Mexico, but New Mexico is also a very small population state, and eventually we run out of professional actors. We start bringing them in from Detroit, Dallas. We start bringing them in from other short areas, calling them local actors. But toward the end, it was pretty much everybody was coming from LA, sometimes even New York, that because when you cast somebody, you use them as a role, you've kind of burned them out to play other roles. You know, I've seen shows where they repeat actors as different characters. Very confusing. I'm glad we haven't done that or had to have multiple people play the same role, which I've also seen on other shows. So there is a very vast talent pool, but when you start especially looking at Native American actors, it's a very small pool, and they're not always right there in the Santa Fe area. So the search goes wider and wider. And after 6 seasons of doing the show, we've used a lot of the local, we've pretty much used up most of the local talent. And I know that sometimes we've even had some of our extras that Bob has cast with us, specifically the hamburger-eating sitting man who later on became Darius. Started, if you look in very early episodes, you'll see him kind of sitting in the red pony, almost like a bouncer at the door. You know, but never really featured there. Well, eventually he got a speaking role, although he had no lines, sitting at the bar just being a menace, eating hamburgers all the time. So the hamburger-eating sitting man eventually got a character name, and now he's got a steady career acting, and especially in a market where there are not as many Native American actors. I have to say it was a real coup for us because of our humane treatment of the subject matter of Native Americans that caused us to have the casting coup of getting Graham Greene, who, you know, big features, retired, and to talk him into doing this tiny little cable TV show that he has to travel for was remarkable. But what a character in the show, and what, you know, nicest guy around, but very menacing on screen. And I think that sometimes it's the bad guys on screen that are the nicest guys off camera. They seem to cathartically get it out.
Well, you can look at A as an example of that.
Oh, you know, and I think some of the most powerful scenes in the show, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, are the ones between Walt and A. Early seasons, there was one in a basketball court with the lights going off. That was a Chris Chulak show. I get shivers thinking about their discussion. Later on, when A. Martinez with a group of his Native Americans pulls up outside the cabin with all the pickups at night, Walt's holding that 30-30 right at his gut. I knew nothing was going to happen. I'm still watching it. I'm scared for the safety of the actors because I'm like, oh my God, he's going to pull that trigger by accident. He's going to start a war. But what a great scene in the dialogue in that. Amazing too. Some of my favorite scenes are just the two of them because it's so powerful, and just being on set watching it happen, astonishing.
Okay, questions? Yes, ma'am.
How did you film and edit the scene where it gets hit in the head with the baseball bat at Mansfield House? Because that was so.
Oh my God.
It was really hard to watch.
Yeah, well, the editing happens back in LA, but we delivered them enough different shots. I actually have a couple pictures of some of the rigs we did. The helmet itself had a camera attached to it, so she could roll her head around, and you were still getting that view that's a little bit similar to Gravity, if you saw that, where you're almost inside the helmet with her. So it's a rig that was actually attached to the helmet that had a small, not one of our big movie cameras, but a smaller little Blackmagic camera. Another one where she is in a harness, and the body, harness is actually holding a bigger camera out in front of her so that she can move around. A lot of handheld camera work, a lot of different angles. And she threw herself into that role literally so much that she tweaked her neck in the process of filming when she had to headbutt another actor and then hit the ground. So she forgets about her own safety sometimes when doing these stunts and threw herself into it, and I know was very sore for a while after and kind of pinched something in her neck. That was one of the more brutal scenes. I thought one of her best episodes too. And without giving too much away, I'm going to say you get to see Chance Gilbert again in season 6, and he is as good as ever.
Right, we repeated a lot of that stuff, and it's just
You're louder tonight.
we're gonna repeat a lot more of that. You're gonna see some of that, and it's pretty cool. And
Peter Stormare.
And Peter was amazing, but Jimmy Miro, which he directed more episodes than the whole show, but he carried that through, and you'll see more of that, and it's fabulous. It's really where he took it was, Yeah, it's a great place.
Yeah, I've only seen rough cuts of 3 of the 10 episodes we've done so far, and one of them was that episode, and I'm just going to say look forward to it. It'll be great. But a lot of camera angles, a lot of time. This was a episode, as I mentioned earlier, that we had many lightning delays. In one of those 2.5-hour lightning delays, because we had so many lightning strikes within a 5-mile spot, it starts the clock again for another half hour. We're waiting. And we're all sitting around, and I said, I come from theater. So why don't we just rehearse? We've got this huge scene coming up next week. I've got almost all the right people here right now doing a different scene. So we're stuck here indoors. Why don't we work out something we're going to do next week? Because we had some actor availability issues. And the actor, Michael, who played her husband, he was on a movie and not available that day, but he's pretty much tied up in a chair. So I played that role. I said, I'll just sit here in the chair and do his 2 lines, and let's block it. Let's work it out. And we spent about 2 hours working out that scene. The only other time I get to sit in a chair is when you see me in The Red Pony. I would put myself in the background. I like to say it's because it's one of the few shows that I could put myself on camera without having to play the perpetrator.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am. The lady in pink.
I was wondering, with the actors and actresses, do they have to, or do you suggest strongly that they read Craig's books before they act?
Some have because they're interested in the backdrop of the role. Notably, people like Peter Weller did not for his role of Lucian, and you're going to see a lot of differences between kind of his West Texas kind of approach with the witticisms to Lucian. Fortunately, in the script, there was enough of the Lucian that we know from the books that he couldn't vary too far, but it's a little different take on the character. He had chosen not to research that part. In some ways, the actors don't want to be overly influenced. They want to look at what the script is as opposed to what the books say. Others, for instance, Lou Diamond Phillips, very much was reading the books and understanding what the storylines and what the character said. I find it incredibly valuable having read the books. In fact, I had read the first book before my interview with these producers, and my knowledge of the subject probably helped me get the job. But it wasn't necessary for what I do, because we're there to paint by numbers that picture that they're drawing when they write the script. And a lot of the actors will feel that way too, that they don't want to be unnecessarily influenced, especially because we're kind of a parallel universe.
But one of the things also that I have been told by some of the folks who are involved in the thing is that by reading Craig's books and by Craig being actually an active consultant, which is unusual for an author to be that actively involved in a show, that there was a different perspective that they got in portraying their characters, right?
A good example is sometime in season 2, I asked Adam, what's your character's first name? He thought about it and he was embarrassed to realize he didn't know. He took the opportunity later when Craig was doing a book signing in the area to pull Craig aside and say, does my character have a first name? Because of course Ferguson is his last name. In the first book, his father, Jim Ferguson, is a deputy ready to retire. A lot of people made that mistake. Oh, it's Jim. I read it in the books. No, that's Dad. And so our producers, and who here, it's a trivia question, can tell me what Ferg's first name is at our show? Archie is correct. When our producers named Archie, because he, in 5th season, you've probably already seen it, he develops a girlfriend who calls him by name, and it even surprises Walt and Vic, who are standing right there. Well, when that script came out, we got a very quick call from Judy, who said, well, that's not the character's first name. It had never been named in a book, but of course Craig had somebody in mind, and had privately told Adam at some point, who immediately forgot, and then we had to remind him later. But it was one of those where, we differ a little bit. We made up a first name for him. It wasn't the writer's concept of a name, yet, and so we got a very panicked call, and we just kind of said, well, we're still going to do it our own way, because we're cocky that way.
And then I had to spend 4 years making paperwork that this guy didn't have a first name.
Well, one of the things we had to deal with is legal clearances. When we pick a name, especially for a bad guy, and whether it's a product we're using that we're featuring, whether it's the name of a person, our lawyers have to look those names up and make sure there's nobody really by that name really living in that town. Maggie, do you have a question?
Come here, Maggie. We can't hear you.
Yeah, speak up a little bit.
Come on, usually you're louder than this. What's going on?
You know, yeah, she's never this quiet on set. It's amazing.
All right. Yell at Randy and everybody will hear you.
I wasn't going to do this. One of the things that the crew did was